Hi, everyone. I'm Allison from RunSignup, and we are super happy to be here with the team from Vacation Races today. They are going to be talking about how they managed to hold and produce the Bryce Canyon Ultras and Zion at Night. It's part of our, series of documenting and understanding how different leaders in our industry are actually making it work with permitting and producing socially distanced races. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to CEO and founder of Vacation Races, Salem.
What's up, everybody? Yes, I thought I'd kind of set the table on what we have been doing, what we've been trying to do. Like a lot of you that are on the call, we kind of got our ass kicked this spring, so we're trying to figure out how to find a way forward. What we ended up doing at the end of April, we sent out a big survey. Actually, it wasn't that big of a survey, but the response was really big. We had over 7,000 people responded to it. But the intent of the survey was trying to figure out what people were like worried about. And was it financial issues? Was it the travel? Was it the group size? Like, what were people worried about? And that kind of informed a lot of our decisions that we've been making in May and June. So what we found. Travel wasn't necessarily the issue. Flights, a lot of people worried about flying, especially international flights, but even domestically. Traveling overnight is not that big of a deal. It's about 11% of people were like, yeah, traveling overnight, they're uncomfortable with. Group size was a big hurdle. But under 100, groups of less than 100, most people were feeling okay about. But once you hit that 100 mark, people started getting comfortable, or at least said they were. People are weirded out about shuttles, so that's a big hurdle that we're having to kind of struggle with. But the thing that really surprised me is when we asked about, how much the financial situation's changed, and of course this was end of April, so I don't know if it's changed more, but we gave people 4 options. So they have to cut back a lot on travel and race entries, have to cut back a little, financial situation hasn't changed much, or for one reason or another, they have even more money to spend on travel and race entries. And what we found was 4% said they were in a better position. 54% said that their financial situation hadn't changed much. 27% said that they would have to cut back a little, and only 14.5% said they'd have to cut back a lot. And that's really the data that surprised me the most. I think there are still people out there who have hobbies. A lot of people have been able to transition to work from home, and they still got money, and they still love the sport, and they still love running as a hobby. They just aren't comfortable with some other aspects of it. So the way we kind of approached things was the state. I mean, our job as race directors really hasn't changed. There's always state guidelines and regulations, and permitting agencies require certain things, and our customers have certain expectations that they need. Those have changed, but trying to marry the two, trying to hold an event that satisfies all the customers' wants and needs while staying in line with the requirements the states ask you to abide by, trying to come up with some formula that works and allows both of those two parties to be happy is really the trick. And that was true before the pandemic. It'll be true after the pandemic. It's kind of a new situation for all of us. So that's kind of the framework that we were looking at. Shuttles are a big deal. So trying to find loop courses is critical, I think. Keeping group sizes small and trying to hold races in locations that people can get to relatively easy without having to get too far away from home. That's kind of it. So then we decided to I'll kind of turn it over to Lyle to talk about what we did at Bryce, and then Dane can talk a little bit more about Zion. But really, we're looking at what we normally do, changes we made, kind of what we saw, and what we recommend for everybody going forward.
Thanks. I just want to cut in to let you know that there is a questions box in your GoToWebinar module. So as you're listening to Lyle and Dane talk through the operations and setup for Bryce and Zion, you can feel free to ask any questions. Johanna and I are going to be going through them as they're asked, and then we will answer them after they give us a little bit more information about how they produce their races.
You want me to talk about Bryce then a little bit? So for Bryce, kind of leading into what Salem said, when we were trying to make a decision on what we want to do for Bryce, we really rely really heavily on the local permitting agencies and the local community, because we don't want to do anything that is going to be skewed as intrusive or unwelcome. You know what I mean? Like, we want to make sure that we're being good neighbors, and that we're not bringing an event there that's not welcome there. Because ideally, you know, the big picture for us is we want to make sure that this is an event that we can continue to do for years, that the community embraces, and that runners enjoy. And so, trying to make a decision on what to do, I sent a survey out to the participants that were doing Bryce, just kind of out of curiosity, like, if we do this event, like, how many of you guys would actually be able to come? And based on those survey results, we had 50%. It was exactly 50% said they would come, 50% wouldn't come. So when I went to the Forest Service and talked to the county, you know, that was obviously their biggest question, is like, well, how many people are you talking about? And so I said, well, based on this, you know, I don't know, somewhere around 600 people, probably 500 to 600 people is what we would probably be looking at for this race. The nice thing for Bryce is we have 5 distances. We have a 100-miler, a 50-mile, a 60K, a 50K, and a 30K. So it was really easy for us for that particular event to just spread everybody out for each distance. And to do so, we gave an hour window for each distance. So for the 100-milers, they had from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. to cross the starting mat. If they were towing the line, going for overall awards, and we told them to make sure they were there right at 5, lining up at 5, and their, you know, overall results would be based off of gun time. Everybody else would be based off of chip time. And what that did also is it allowed people that were worried about cutoff times, because all of our cutoff times were based off of a 6 a.m. start. So if anybody started at 6 a.m., then that's when those cutoff times on course were based off of. So if somebody started closer to 5, then they essentially got an extra hour to make those cutoff times. They didn't get an extra hour to complete the entire course, but they got an extra hour to make those cutoff times, because every race we do, we always end up getting people that tell me afterwards they were confident they could have made up the time. Whether that's true or not, that's totally up to them. But like, they're all very confident they could have made the time. So this is a prime example of a situation where we were able to give them the opportunity to see if they could make that time up. And so that was kind of how we dealt with the spreading everybody out issue. You know, aid stations were a little different. You know, we had to kind of adjust how we normally, you know, the aid station nutrition options and stuff that we did. We went with a pre-packaged kind of grab and go type setup at the aid stations to kind of facilitate a more sterile and clean aid station atmosphere. And I think in general it went really well. We really instructed the runners to utilize their drop bags as much as possible, which they did, which was great. I didn't feel like anybody was trying to push the issue on any of the rules and guidelines that we gave everybody. Everybody was very respectful to the rules, the congregating rules and everything. The way we separated everybody at the start was really nice. I actually had a radio tuner that we had set up, so when I make announcements, everybody could just turn their car radios to the radio station, and when I make announcements, they could hear it from their car radio, so they could make their way from their car over to the starting line for each of those distances too. So it made it a little less congregated at the start. And so like we just did some things like that. We kind of been tinkering around with some hands-free water filling setup, where we actually utilized a foot pedal that the runners could step on to refill their water bottles and stuff. and we're still working out some of the kinks with that. But I think that it's a good system, what we developed, and I'm actually really hopeful going forward that that's going to be a promising new setup that we can utilize going forward. And then same with the finish line. Everybody, we asked everybody when they finished to not congregate, and everybody was very respectful of that. They finished, their family, and friends came and cheered them on, and I never saw any groupings very big there. Probably I never even saw any more than probably 15 people congregated around the finish line, which is great. And so everybody came, finished, and then they left and went on their way. And so it went exactly how we wanted it to go. And when I approached the Forest Service and the county about doing the race, that was their first question to me was, well, do you think you can operate this event and still maintain, the social distancing and everything that we have in place? And I said, yeah, I think we can. I mean, we'll obviously have to change some things, but I really don't see any reason why we can't do that. And so they were like, well, if you're confident you can, then we don't have any issues. We think you should do the event, which was actually kind of the push in that direction that I needed, because until that point we'd just been canceling races, and this was the first one that we were like, nope, we're going to do this one because they were so supportive of us doing it. And so again, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, I think it makes a really big difference to be in close communication with your permitting agencies and be very open and communicate with them very freely, because that's going to help a lot.
If I can add a little bit of color, we did get a little bit of some commentary from people regarding not having fresh food at the aid stations. They'd always qualify it by, like, you guys did exactly what you said you were going to do, but not having fresh food affected them a little bit more. We did find, I think, this is anecdotal, but I'm confident that everyone who showed up was undertrained. And Bryce Canyon Ultra is not one you want to show up to undertrained. So we had a much higher DNF rate than we normally do. And for those who finished, they're like, oh, I'm so beat up, that was brutal. Because I think people didn't have a chance to sign up. So all that means is I think 100 milers may not be overly attractive for a little while. But some of the shorter distances, even on trails, are still going to be appealing. But know that people are probably going to show up a little bit like that. And the only other bit of feedback that I would say that of negative feedback that we got when we extracted some people, we had some radio issues, and we had some people extracting folks that we hadn't necessarily intended on, and didn't have masks for everybody in the car. And that was something that we maybe we overlooked, that we corrected in the future, is making sure that we have like disposable masks for anyone you got to extract, and make sure that staff are wearing them at all times. We did a pretty good job with that, but we didn't bat 1,000. So that's all the feedback, the negative feedback I've seen. Overall, people were pretty happy to have a chance to be out there.
Yeah, for sure. I heard that a lot too from people, just like, well, I didn't think this race was going to happen, so I kind of just quit training. I kind of quit putting in the effort, and then when it actually did happen, I'm like, well, let's go for it, And to Salem's point, yeah, our Bryce Canyon race it's a brutal one, and it was hot too.
Lyle, we have a couple of questions about the radio broadcast that you used. So what platform did you use, and could you just explain a little bit more about how that works?
I'm not very savvy with that stuff. The guy that we usually hire to do our sound and announcing at all of our races, he has a lot of radio equipment and stuff, and so he has this FM tuner that I just borrowed from him. So you just plug it into your radio or to your sound system, and you pick a radio station that, obviously I had to make sure that it didn't conflict with any radio stations in the area first. And so you just tune that FM tuner to that radio station, and then you just tell everybody to tune into that on their car radios, and then any announcements you make will be broadcast over that. And he said it had about like a 2-mile radius, which was great for our staging area. It did really work really well. So,
and I think they call it transmitter, right?
Yeah, it's an FM transmitter. So if you've ever gone like and seen Christmas lights and someone's got their lights tuned to a radio and they're like, hey, tune into this station, it's the same idea, same technology. It's basically just a little FM transmitter, like Lyle said. You plug it into your sound system, and then you plug it into a little antenna, and it broadcasts the signal to whatever FM station you dial it into. And then anyone in a 2-mile radius can hear what you say.
Because that was kind of the idea. Like we did, and I didn't really talk about this before, but we didn't do an expo for the race. What we did was we did a drive-up bib pickup service, which worked really well. We just had a big field that everybody pulled into. We did a big loop, and they could pull up, and we actually split the cars so that they were going on both sides of our bib pickup tent, and we just handed them their bibs, and then as they were leaving the field, they could drop off their drop bags. And so the idea was just try and keep everybody in their cars the day before, so everybody wasn't getting out and congregating. And I jumped on the sound system several times during the day with that too, just to kind of give updates on what, the weather conditions and all that stuff that they could expect the next day, and just make sure to remind them to hydrate really well, and just your typical pre-race announcements and stuff. And I think it was very, very well received. So
we did a couple of other things there in terms of drop bags, where we separated every drop bag by like distance and location that they were going to. So we didn't have to like handle them ourselves. We kind of just roll up the tarp and move it. So it was really hands-free drop bag largely. And then we always limit to one pacer on course at a time. You can utilize multiple pacers during the race, but you can only have one at a time with you. But the other major thing is we limit it to one crew member. So they're only allowed to have one crew member at every at the crew aid stations. We originally allowed crew, but we got pushed back. They're like, we really would like to have a crew member. So we allowed one, and again, all the reports we had were they were more respectful than they've ever been. So everyone was kind of like, just happened to be there and were willing to kind of play by the rules.
And the way we controlled that was we printed off one pacer bib for each runner, and we also printed off one crew bib for each runner. And so they got one of each, and the aid stations, there was only one crew member that was allowed out of the car at the aid station, and then obviously only one pacer's allowed on the trail with them at one time. And whoever's that crew or that pacer, they had to be wearing that bib when they were out of their vehicle. So
it worked well. It was good. It was a good system, and it was well received.
Okay, well, I guess before we get to the questions, let's hear about Zion at Night. Dean, if you could explain the whole concept of the race, and then what you did to make it happen.
Sure. So what we did was Zion at Night. Bryce Canyon Ultras was one of our normal races, right? It was in our calendar, and once we got the go-ahead from permitting agencies and realized we could make that happen, we started looking at a couple months that we had cleared up because we had to cancel events, and we're like, what could we fill in this time? Can we offer something new for our runners to come do and participate in? And Zion is the backyard for most of our team. Like we're all down in St. George, and so it was close, kind of on our home turf, and so we felt like that was one that we could do. We knew the area really well, and we had good relationships with the permitting agencies, and so we thought we could pull a race together really quick, and we did, but it ended up being not as quick as we thought. And so the weather in St. George or southern Utah gets exponentially hotter at this time of year, so days made the difference between doing a day event and then it being too hot to do an event during the day. And so because one of our permitting agencies was BLM, and they took a little longer because they wanted to approve it, but it wasn't something they felt a decision they could make on the local level. It had to go to, I think, Washington, D.C., and it's a federal agency, and so they had to kind of push it up the chain. So it took a little bit longer, and so our hoped for race date ended up being just this last weekend, so a little bit later into June, and we were hoping for later in May. And so those few weeks made the difference where it was going to be too hot to do the event. And also the BLM wanted to permit it, but they were concerned about the overcrowding on trails already. Obviously, the compliance and permitting and everything is going to change state to state, county to county. And in Utah, they've been pretty open throughout all of this. And so a lot of people had been flocking to Utah and are recreating down there. And so the BLM was concerned about congestion on the trails. And Lyle actually suggested, like, well, what if we did it during the night instead of during the day? Would the BLM be more comfortable with that? So we suggested that to the BLM, and they thought it was great. And again, because we had a good relationship with them, we permit other events. The permitting was pretty easy. We explained to them.
Running in at night in the desert is amazing. That's something that, like, outside in the desert at night is really stunning. And so when we had that idea, it was like, oh, this is even better. So
yeah, it just so happened that it was going to be compliant, and it was also going to be spectacular. It wasn't like a concession. We're like, oh no, this will be great. It'll be a lot of fun. People are going to love this. So we did it at night, and we staggered. So it was a half marathon trail run, and in Utah, the requirement was no congregating larger than groups of 50. And so we said every runner who signed up from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., they sign up and they pick a time slot, and each time slot only had 50 spots available. So people could pick a time spot, 7 p.m., 9 p.m., midnight, 2 in the morning. Yeah, so that's how we did it. We implemented a lot of the same things that Lyle did at Bryce. We used the FM transmitter, so we could broadcast to people, let them know when to get, when they could get out of their cars, come get their bibs, get ready for their race, and also able to broadcast pre-race instructions, details about course markings, things like that. We didn't do a drive-through pickup because we only had 50 every hour. We just did pickup right there at the start line. So what we found was that runners, let's say if you signed up for a 7 p.m. start time, we encouraged them to get there no earlier than 30 minutes before their start time. And we left the start line open. We had a rolling start until about 30 minutes after. And so it was really just a trickle of people. You obviously see a bump right at about 7, but there was a few people that we let start early, and then there was people that we'd have starting up until about 7:20, 20 minutes after the hour. So that hour window before and after the actual start time really helped spread people out, and we never had people congregating more than 20 or 30. In fact, in hindsight, we look at it, we probably could have done 50 every half hour and done 100 people an hour and still easily been compliant and being able to practice social distancing. And we didn't have an expo, we just had the bid pickup, but we did have our merchandise tent there set up selling merchandise, and we operated that just like you would any grocery store or retail store, right? Like there was directional arrows telling them which way to go through. We encouraged people to stay 6 feet apart. Our staff were wearing face masks. We had hand sanitizer. We did notice that hand sanitizer at the toilets got used a lot more than normal, which is a little discouraging because, guys, you should be using hand sanitizer every time you use the bathroom on course, not just during pandemic. Yeah, so I'm trying to think. So we did that. Bid pickup was the same. We had our crew wear face masks, and yeah, we're just able to, again, like Lyle said, everybody was very respectful of what we asked of them, right? They were just pleased to be out there. They were so happy to be at an event that they were fine with it. And the one thing that was interesting with design at night was we knew we could put on a good race and it'd be a really wonderful experience, but there's been a lot, people are so happy with the event. There's interest, whether, COVID or not, like it's a thing, the format of it, people really enjoyed. They enjoyed the night race. They enjoyed the staggered start. There are people who got like their own individual race pretty much, you know what I mean? Like they had a personal, someone give them the rundown of the course before they started, and then they had someone greeting them at the finish line. Obviously, you got to do away with a lot of the pomp and circumstance, right? We didn't have an announcer at the finish line constantly ringing them in. And so we had to make changes, and some of those were sacrifices or compromises, but some of those changes are actually improvements. And so I think it's important when figuring out how to put these races on, paying attention to the things that not only work well under the circumstances, but work really well and might be worth adopting under any circumstance.
Yeah, we got the open rolling start. We saw that we had lots of people comment that at Bryce as well. It takes the pressure off having to use the bathroom before the gun goes off, takes pressure off having to park on time. So I think in the future, we'll say the elite start is at, X o'clock, but the the starting line is open for the next 45 minutes or whatever. And I think that'll take the edge off a lot of people. And so if you want that big group gun, countdown, gun goes off, you can get it. Or if you just want a little bit more relaxed atmosphere, you can do it. The other thing that I think was interesting, because we had it every hour at night, we had a lot more people sign up at midnight than we did at 11. And we don't totally know why, but we just think there's something about being able to say you started at midnight there were some weird, interesting, weird registration patterns that we saw. I can't even necessarily explain them, but I can try. And that was fun for me.
I mean, it made it for a long night for us, obviously. But again, we didn't have an expo the day before, and so I really felt like things kind of balanced out. But there were people who ran at 8 p.m. and they got to see the sunset, and then they got to see the moonrise. And then there were people who ran, at 4 a.m. and they got to see the moon, and then they got to see sunrise. Like it was a really, really special experience for a lot of runners. And I think the rolling start, it was great. Both Lyle and the Bryce race and the Zion race were both trail runs. And so I think also there's something to that. You don't want a big mass start on a trail run anyway. And so this rolling start and staggered start was an easy way to, I think it was really enjoyable and desirable for runners. So again, there's still something to have, to be said for that, the way your adrenaline gets pumping with your shoulder to shoulder with a lot of people. But for these two races specifically, I think it worked out really well to stagger and to have a rolling, more relaxed start line.
And could you guys just both clarify how many total runners were in each of the races?
For Bryce, we had just about 500.
It was like 505 or something like that. It was just over 500.
Yeah, and we had just about 800 at Zion at night, which again was, we announced open registration and had the event all within about 3 weeks. So we were ecstatic to have that many people show up.
For Zion at night, we're having a question about check-in tables. So how many check-in tables did you have, and were bibs dynamically assigned or pre-assigned?
Yeah, bibs were, so we had one check-in table and bibs were pre-assigned. We had to reassign some bibs on site, obviously, just because there's errors or people registered. We left registration open, which we normally don't. And so, so we had one check-in table. We had the bibs on the table and the shirts behind us. You grab the bib, grab their shirt, and then if we had to make reassignments, then we just do it pen and paper manual, and then we just make those changes. Again, we had a lot of time on our hands. It was through the night. There was a lot of slow moments where we could kind of get caught up on things like that. It's not like our typical half marathon, right, where it's just a sprint. You're like, things start, and then before you know it, it's all over, and then you're cleaning everything up. We had time, which was good. It helped us, work out some of those kinds of things.
We have several questions about volunteers. So first, did you use them? And if yes, did you have any trouble recruiting them?
So before we answer that, we should, I'd like to explain how we staff our races, just because everybody's going to do it differently. So when we talk about volunteers and crew and things like that, everybody knows what we're talking about. Typically at a race, what we do is we have a few employees that are full-time, like this is all we do. And then we'll also hire some people to be on our crew, and that's both for an expo and a race. And so those are paid positions. And then we also have a whole ton of volunteers. So we've got our full-time employees and then crew, which are staff, they're paid, it's a paid position, they're paid to be there, and we work with them a lot.
Basically what Dane's saying, any position that we feel like is race critical, like we have to have somebody filling that position, like we'll just pay somebody because we can't risk them just not showing up. But then there's a lot of other positions that we can kind of fill with people that just want to come and help out and volunteer, and we'll give discounts and stuff to them, discount codes for them to come and volunteer. So
yeah. So at Zion at night, we didn't take any volunteers. Like I said, Zion's kind of backyard for a lot of our team, so we kind of lean heavily on our full-time staff and people who normally wouldn't maybe be working a race. Like, we had someone that Kaylee lives there and does our customer service, and Anna lives there and does marketing, but they both came out and worked the race. And so we had kind of a skeleton crew, and we didn't open it up to volunteers. I think originally I was kind of hyper concerned about compliance and contamination and where were these people going to come from and the lack of control we have over that. In hindsight, though, I think that was a little more cautious than I needed to be. I think we could have easily recruited volunteers how we normally do, set out a couple positions and asked for volunteers either from the community like we normally do, and then also put it out to our runners like we normally do. We maybe would have vetted it a little more carefully, made sure, you know, it wasn't like we need 100 volunteers and we'll just take anybody and we'll just plug and play. It was a little more focused, a little more specific. But I think we would have gone through similar means, kind of put it out to our runners and seen if any of them wanted to volunteer, and then also worked with local contacts and local community volunteer organizations to get volunteers. So we didn't use any, but in hindsight, I think we could have and been okay. We just would have required a little more supervision and training, right, on masks and interactions and hand sanitizer, you know, to make sure you're compliant and also being safe and putting runners at ease.
It was the same at Bryce. We didn't utilize volunteers. Without doing the expo, with us not doing an expo, we just didn't have as much of a need for volunteers. We did have, you know, our normal staff and our paid positions, which were also reduced. We didn't even need as many of them, but volunteers, you know, we had a few people volunteer, but it just wasn't as critical as it usually is.
And we Lyle reached out to all the aid station groups that were going to man the aid stations at Bryce to make sure they were comfortable. We did have a group that was like, yeah, we're uncomfortable and backed out, which was perfectly okay, fine with us. But we were able to find somebody to fill that. So there's hesitancy by a lot of people, but there's still quite a few people who are still willing to help pitch in. You just have to make sure everybody's got a mask and that they're using them, and that you got ample hand sanitizer for everybody. And it's usually we found that was pretty effective.
We're getting a lot of questions too about the aid stations. So could you guys explain in a little bit more detail how your aid stations typically work for your races, and then what modifications you made? And then there's several questions asking for more details about the water jug with the foot pedal and what that setup looks like.
So it's different for our ultras and our half marathons, the way our aid station set up. So I can talk a little bit. I can talk about both actually. For the ultras, typically we'll have, you know, aid stations set up every 5 to 7 miles along the course, where we have, you know, salty and sweet treats as well as soda, and historically we'll cook up things like bacon and quesadillas and burritos and sandwiches and fresh cut up fruit and all, just basically just a smorgasbord of stuff that they can pick from and eat. And so like this year we had to obviously adjust that to where we weren't, you know, preparing as much stuff. It was all just prepackaged things. So we had things like fruit cups, and we had uncrustable sandwiches, and we had cup of noodles, and then we just had, you know, granola bars, trail mix, gels, soda, you know, and then our water and our electrolyte drinks and all that good stuff. And so like we had a fair amount of stuff for them to pick from at those. When I set up so we use something that's called a ultra spout on all of our coolers. It's a high flow valve that we've used ever since we started doing our half marathons, that we put on our coolers. And I after the first year doing it, where we had one ultra spout on each cooler, I created a manifold that we could put multiple spouts on, so that, because all of our traditional half marathons are all cup free races. So we don't have volunteers filling cups and cleaning up cups and all that stuff. It's just all hands free. And so the idea with the ultra spout is it's a one hand single action. You're not having to hold your cup underneath there and then use your other hand to push the button in to dispense water. It's just you just hit it. It's a high flow valve, so it fills your container really fast, and then you just keep on moving. So it really flows really well at our half marathons. But the drawback to it though is, like, as much as you want to just your hand to not touch it, everybody's hands obviously touching it with your whatever bottle or container you're using, you're going to touch.
The flap is kind of close to the nozzle. So, I mean, so a lot of times when people go to push the flap, their hand will brush it. It can brush the nozzle.
So the valve itself is kind of the main key component that you really need, because it's a one action component, which is great. When we started trying to figure, talking about the problems that we needed to try and address, that was obviously a contamination point that we had to look at. It's like, okay, so hands are touching that, and we all know runners, like, their hands aren't always the cleanest thing when they come into aid stations. So like, yeah. And so, we're like, okay, so that's a contamination point that we need to address. And so Dane was actually the one that came up with the idea. He's like, what if we got, like, those drum kick pedals? If you get one of those drum kick pedals, could we rig one of those up in such a way? And my son's a drummer, so I just happened to have a kick pedal at my house. So I was like, yeah, I think I can make this work. So I went and tinkered with it a little bit and rigged up a chain connected to the little valve. So when you stepped on it, it pulled the little flap back and dispensed the water. So you could just walk up to it, step on the foot pedal, hold your thing underneath of it. It fills your bottle, container, whatever you're using, and then you just go on your merry way. And so it was all great. We rigged that up before Bryce, and then there was just some issues. So I think we didn't have them staked down to the ground or anything like that. And so, like, I think if we just stake them down, then the pedals don't move around as much. And then the other thing is you kind of have to offset the pedal. You can't put it right underneath of the valve, or else you're going to get your foot covered in water. So you got to kind of offset the pedal to one side or the other. So as you step on it, it's not just dumping water right on your foot. And then at the Zion at Night race, we have these big water containers. They're called Water Monster. If you look it up online, the company's called Water Monster. They actually are the ones that bought the rights to the Ultra Spouts now, so you can actually buy the Ultra Spouts from Water Monster directly. It's under accessories from Water Monster's website. They're great. We actually rigged up a manifold system coming straight off of the Water Monsters at the Zion at Night race. So we have 250 gallons of water at each of the aid stations. And so because of that, we really had very small volunteer needs at the aid stations. They essentially just kind of ran themselves. Me and another staff member, we just kind of patrolled the course throughout the night and just checked, the gnarly, that's the electrolyte drink that we use. We just checked the gnarly coolers periodically, make sure that they were still good, and then make sure that we still had honey stinger gels on the tables, and that's it. And we set up our big bright balloon lights at the aid stations too, and so we just made sure that the generators were topped off with gas and stuff. But it really was pretty simple grassroots style event that went really well. And the only problem that I was going to say with the foot pedals was when I rigged them up for Bryce, I rigged them up with the coolers on a table, and then for Zion at Night, we had the manifold coming off the Water Monster, and I didn't take that into account with the chain length, and so the foot pedals didn't work.
Yeah, and I'll say the foot pedals themselves, it's the concept is good. Somebody's got it. A better engineer's got to like really figure it out. It was kind of, I'm not sure that it worked as well as we wanted it to.
The concept works great. We asked Water Monster, we told Water Monster though, because they keep sending out emails like advertising this system. The Water Monster is like, oh, it's social distancing, and it's not. As it is, like Lyle's saying, there's a high risk for contamination. And so we told them, hey, here's something we rigged up. It'd be really great if you guys came up with a more elegant solution. So hopefully that's something they consider, because it's really a simple mechanism. Just you step and it pushes the flap and it dispenses water. So it's real simple. So hopefully they can come up with something, that works a little better.
And I'm going to keep tinkering with it. It's really the things that didn't work for us were so minute that I can adjust them pretty easily and make them work for us. So it is good, but the foot pedals are pretty pricey. So like I think to Dane and Salem's point is like if somebody saw this as an opportunity to come up with something better, there's definitely an opportunity there. So
that's free idea, guys. If somebody out there can make a better one, patent it and sell it, we'll buy them. Or you
Yeah.
give them to us free and we won't charge royalties.
We
Either way.
are your customer for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Lyle touched on most of it. So the only other change that we had to make, normally at our half marathons, we have about 6 aid stations it's almost every 2 miles. And the Zion at night, one, because it was trail, and two, because we were kind of limiting the number of people that we had working the event. We only had the three aid stations. They were well stocked, but there was only the 3 of them. And like Lyle said, he and one of our other teammates would just every once in a while go around and make sure that generators were topped off with gas, that water and other electrolyte drink were full, and things like that. And we just kind of gave everybody specific instructions about where the trash cans were. Don't litter and behave yourselves, because they're unsupervised aid stations. And we usually have bananas and oranges cut up the latter half of our half marathons, and we didn't have those this time, again, to avoid any food handling.
Did you guys have a competitive aspect with awards, either age group or overall finishers? And then also at the finish line, did you hand out medals or any sort of food or beverage? And how did you handle that?
So for Bryce, we give them the option. We have medals and we have some mugs that we have made up for each distance, and so we allow them to choose which one they want when they finish. So for Bryce, they just came in onesie twosies, so they hit the food tent when they finished. They got their recovery food box, and then they would walk about 100 yards over to where we had the awards tent set up, and they could pick which award they wanted. 100 milers get buckles. Everybody else got to pick between the medal or the mug, and then we actually had over at our merch tent another 100 yards past that where they could claim their race shirt. I did that because I didn't want anybody congregating the day before when they got their bibs, but it wouldn't have been an issue. We could have easily handed their shirts out with their bibs when we handed them their bibs in the drive up format, but I just wanted to try and reduce as much as possible. So we made it so that they had to claim their shirt after they finished, which worked out really good too. So everybody finished, and then they just had, a few 100 yards that they had to go to, between stations basically to pick up and claim their awards and stuff. We did not do an award ceremony. We just shipped everything out. So we only do for the ultras, we only do top 3 male and top 3 female. For each distance. We don't do age group awards for the ultras, and so it's easier to verify all the results, especially where we had an hour window that people could have started in, just to make sure that everything checked out before we handed anything. So
yeah, it was similar at Zion at night. We do have an awards category, but we didn't do an awards ceremony or announce the placements the night of the event, again, because it was so spread out. We wouldn't know until after the last runner had come in, the placements. And so we'll ship out anybody who earned an award. But at the finish line, we did have finisher awards. We had chocolate milk and banana and like a post-race food snack box. And that was distributed by one of our team members who was there. Again, it was such a slow trickle of people. It was never just like people constantly crossing the finish line, they couldn't keep up. So each person that crossed, pretty much we were able to hand them their finisher award and kind of even ask them, do you want chocolate milk? And if they didn't, then they're fine. Or if they did, we grab it for them. And so there wasn't a lot of hands all over everything.
Were both of the courses loop courses? And is that something important, like, moving forward, looking at other potential race courses? Is that an important consideration?
Yeah, I mean, shuttles obviously are going to add a large level of difficulty to hosting an event during these times right now. And so, Zion and Night was a loop course, and then of course Bryce was several different loops depending on which distance you did. But yeah, the start and finish line was all at the same place.
I think if attendance matters, which it does in this industry, like I don't see another way around it. Like There's some places, like we do have a race coming up in Tennessee, and they're a little, they don't have as many guidelines, and we're going to try some things with the shuttle, but everything else we're doing is, people are just worried about that. Most people are. So it's something that I think race directors have to, you have to just say, okay, if they don't want to ride shuttles, if we can't avoid it, we should be doing a loop.
Yeah. Yeah, the loops.
Yeah, and you can always do some things too. Like our Lake Powell race that we do in October, we allow people to either park at the start or the finish in the morning and take the shuttle either before or after the race. And so like doing some things like that, you can really kind of like limit the number of people on buses all at one time. And so I mean that's always an option going forward that you can do if it works out for your event. But even still, it's going to be a challenge that you're going to have to overcome.
Yeah, I think as an event organizer, everybody knows that anytime you don't have to use shuttles, it's a plus. And even I think now more than ever, a loop is a home run. But there are things, that we will, because some of our races do still require shuttles, that we're going to have to try and see how we can get away with it.
And then this is a question that's relevant to passing and any potential out and back sections within a loop course. Did you give your participants any guidelines on how they should pass each other on the course, or was that not really a concern for your events because it spread out pretty quickly?
It wasn't really a concern. Like we told everybody that if same rules apply, but if you're passing somebody, to just give them a heads up before you catch up to them, so that if they're concerned about it or if you're concerned about it, you can give them a wide berth as you're passing them, and stuff. But typically with how we spread it out, the congestion on course wasn't.
And that's basic trail etiquette. Try to just make your presence known, talk to each other, communicate. You can figure out you need pass. So again, everyone right now feels like, especially everyone out there, is just happy to be there. No one's trying to be an asshole. Like it's everyone's pretty chill and trying to be considerate of others.
There's a question about insurance. Was there any additional insurance requirement that you had to add into your current insurance, or were the BLM and counties fine with your current event insurance policies?
No, our insurance policy is pretty good. So yeah, there was no additional need for additional insurance. We did have one person email us that wanted us to sign some sort of agreement with them. A participant that wanted us to sign some sort of agreement with them that we would not hold them accountable if somebody got sick with the coronavirus, which obviously we would not. So
I don't mean to make light of this. I don't really truly don't mean to make light of it, but from my perspective, somebody would have to contract it within like the 2 weeks around the race. They would have to get sick enough that they would be upset about it. They'd have to be able to prove that they contracted it at our event and that they contracted it due to our negligence at the event. And I just don't see that happen. Like that's not a meaningful risk.
It's
naive, but I don't know.
Risk of participating in any public event. This we're more hyper aware of it. But anytime you attend a public event, you're at risk of being exposed to illnesses or weather conditions and things like that. And this is no different, although we are taking precautions to protect people from it. And so at the end of the day, if we're compliant, then there was a risk that people had to take. We didn't have to change our insurance, but the BLM did ask to see any language that we had in our waiver, anything like that, that maybe specifically addressed coronavirus. And so I shared that with them.
Did you make any updates to that waiver?
Yeah, we did. We have, but it wasn't so much to say if you get coronavirus, it's not our fault. It wasn't anything like that. Because again, I think that's already inherently included in the waiver saying, we're attending a public event and it's not the event's fault.
It was more to kind of explain our positioning on if we had to cancel events and things like that.
Yeah.
It was more just letting people know. They can make a decision and go in eyes wide open as to if it cancels, like what's their real risk.
Cancellation, and also letting people know that we might have to make operational changes to our event that we aren't at this time aware of, right? Like compliance 3 months from now is going to be very different than it is if we were holding the event today. And so we want runners to know we're confident we can do the event. We might have to make some changes to it, And so if you stay signed up, then you're going to be subject to those changes, including things like a rolling start. Like maybe 6 months ago when they signed up, it was 7 a.m. start time. And now we're going to say, actually, we're going to let people start at 6 a.m. and we're going to leave the start line open until 9 a.m., which isn't exactly what they signed up for, but that's what the change we'll have to make to be compliant. So that's more what our waiver says, is letting people know we're going to put on the best event we can. We might have to make some logistical changes to be compliant. And if you're not comfortable with that, you should back out now, because we're not going to give you a refund because you didn't like that you didn't get to start at 7 a.m. with everybody else. That kind of thing. That's more what the language suggests for us.
Okay, somebody asked if you can talk about the scavenger hunt at Zion. And also there's feedback from their friend who loved your race. Item of note, this was the first time she was sad to see the finish line as she didn't want it to end.
Yeah. That's awesome. It was really, I don't want to toot our own horn, but it was really special. Like, it was a full moon. It's the desert outside Zion. Like, it was awesome. And so and it's like you had the whole thing to yourself. It was like somebody had gone out and set up like support just for you. Like, there were people that were on that trail that didn't see another soul the entire time because their pace was just fast enough that nobody ever caught them, but they never caught the person that started in front of them. So it was pretty cool.
And I will say the full moon was intentional. Like, we had talked about maybe doing it this next weekend, and we were just like, no, let's get in there because it's a full moon that weekend. It's gonna be awesome. And it was windy, but it was awesome.
Yeah. So the Zion Explorer Cup, I don't know how relevant that'll be to a lot of race directors, but at our races, you know, we pair them with the national parks, and so we want people to have a really positive experience in the park, you know, and we kind of feel like the race is just a part of that. It's kind of like the launch pad or the gateway to more exploration of a place a lot of people have never been before, in these places that we love. And so we've always tried to incentivize people to enjoy the park by offering activities. Like, we used to have club hikes. So, you know, if you finish the race, I think the first one Salem ever did was Angels Landing, right? That was like the Angels Club. If you finish the race and hike Angels Landing, which is an iconic hike in Zion National Park, within 72 hours of finishing your race, and take a photo up there with your bib and your finisher medal and send it to us, then you would get something. It used to be 50% off a future race, and then we made like these little survey marker medallions that we'd give people. So that's a thing we've done. And then at this race, we wanted to experiment with something new, which is basically just a scavenger hunt, like a whole list of activities and things they can do in the park, outside the park, our favorite restaurants, things like that. So it's just kind of a way to promote the local community, local businesses, and then also activities in the park. And then if you get a minimum number of points, right, each activity is worth points, then you get like a little wooden badge. So it's just like a little extra. It's an add-on, right? It's a little extra to your race experience. And so we might substitute. Yeah, there's an example of one of the things that we made. So it's just kind of a little extra.
Can you guys share what's next in terms of your race calendar?
Yeah. So Lyle is in Idaho right now on his way to Montana to do some scouting. I think we made an announcement earlier this week that we were going to suspend Rushmore just this year. That's a race we have in September, just due to low turnout. It was probably, anyway, it's a complicated story, but it'll be next year. But the rest of our calendar, we're anticipating we're going to be able to hold, just likely with modifications. We do expect to do another Zion at night. We had lots of people comment like, oh, I'd love to come, but 3 weeks is too short a notice or whatever. So we're looking at trying to line that up for August, and so people will have a couple of months to get ready. Lyle's up making sure that we can hold a Yellowstone. We talked to the Forest Service there using our Yellowstone course, which is a loop, and they were like, yeah, you can't do it at night. There's bears. And so we're going to do that one during the day, but same format. It'll just be during the day. And what's great about there is it doesn't get crazy hot, so should be very runnable, albeit with plenty of mosquitoes. And then we've talked about trying to do a Zion Ultras. We had to cancel that. That's typically an April race for us, but I think that there's room and an appetite for it in probably in September. So we haven't made formal announcements for those. We're waiting to kind of finalize some things and make sure that we can actually do those, and we'll be announcing those. And then next year we're planning on a normal schedule, but I will tell you, I'm very gun shy about all of it. I don't know what's going to happen. My personal pessimism, I guess. I don't see a vaccine existing ever. I think this is just something we're all going to have to get used to. And I think people are going to have to start to get comfortable, and I just think that may take a while.
And then I guess just the final question is, I mean, I think these races were pretty unique and great experiences, but was it worth it? And what would you recommend to other race directors that don't really know how to get started? Provide some motivational words for our community.
Just think outside the box, try to think of like ways that you can be creative and come up with something that people will want to do, because people are chomping at the bit to get out and do stuff right now. Like they really are. They want to participate.
Yeah, we had a lot of people at Zion who'd never run with us before, but we're the only game in town, so they signed up. So if you can do it, if you're stable, if you can work with your permitting agencies, you've got a good relationship with them, I think it's worth trying stuff. And that's kind of been our attitude lately.
I think that's a pretty valuable point that Salem made there too, is like we've worked well enough with our permitting agencies long enough now that when we come to them with an idea, they don't question our ability to do what we say we can do, because we've proved ourselves time and time again to them. That I think for some other people, that if they would have come to them with this idea, they would have been like, yeah, I'm not going to let you guys be the guinea pig on this, but like for us, they were, BLM, like we do a lot of events with them already. And so they were like, yeah, we trust you guys. We know that you guys can do what you say you're going to do. So
I just made this analogy up. So if it's a bad one, I apologize. But it just came to my mind, like when you're learning another language, right? And you want to be like, how do I say this in this language? It's like, well, you don't say that. That's something you say in English. But like a similar expression or what you're trying to communicate, this is how they say it in that language. Right now, I think planning races kind of needs to be that way a little bit. Stop being like, well, this is how I do races. How do I do that in this new format or with these restrictions? And it's like, well, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't do it exactly how you used to. So think about how you can put on an event, or how you can put on something that runners are really going to enjoy, that maybe resembles or in spirit is the same as what we used to do, but for right now is just a little different, but still captures the spirit of it. So
yeah, Dane's right. That was a terrible analogy. No, I'm just kidding. That made sense. I got to do that. That was actually pretty good. There's a couple of things that, in terms of, let me answer the question. It was worth it to us, for a couple of reasons. I'm not anticipating that, the night races and like small group format is the future. I actually do think it'll probably make its way into our regular calendar. The response was very, very positive. But it was worth it purely just because, like, we're doing something. Like, we're so used to working, it's taken a mental toll, I know, on me, and it was very nice being out and being able to do something, and not feel like we're just sitting waiting to die. Like we're able to get out and do something. So purely from that perspective, it was good. We were able to make a little bit of money on Zion at night. I don't know about Bryce. Bryce is just because it was different. We were pretty fully staffed there. So was it worth it? Yeah, I mean, so much so that we're going to do it again. But what advice I give? So when everything started going down, early April, I picked up a book that I'd read before, that I'd recommend to anybody. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? It's a short book. It's typically used in like corporate settings, but it's really a metaphor to help figure out how to deal with change. And ultimately, you can take the attitude of, this is what I do, I know this, I'm not going to change. I'm just going to wait for everything. I'm going to be mad about it until it happens again, until I can do my normal races. Or you can kind of go, all right, things changed. All right, what's new? What's next? Let's try it. Let's figure it out. I think everyone on this call is probably an above average problem solver. And I think that's it. I just think that the formula's got to change. We've got to figure out some stuff. We've got to be okay with failing and trying stuff that doesn't work. But I think if you engage with your market, you talk to people, you try to get your lead from, do they want races? Do they not? And really try to listen to what their concerns are. I think there's still opportunity out there. I will say part of our approach, and we're lucky to be in the position we're in, is the people that don't want to go that are uncomfortable traveling, we've kind of amped up some of our virtual offerings. For the people who do want to travel, we're trying to satisfy them. There's just kind of like, we're trying to look at our market and the people that listen to us as discrete segments and really trying to address all of their concerns again, they've got money to spend, at least that's what our data suggests. We just have to come up with an offering that's going to appeal to them that also kind of satisfies whatever state requirements you have. We're lucky we live in Utah for a lot of reasons, but I think that the pandemic was handled pretty well. It's who knows? It's not over. But it put us in a position where we could hold some events. But again, it's those relationships. We made it a point to really try to build solid relationships with all the permitting agencies because we want to be a lasting entity, and that's been able to pay off for us. So anybody out there in that same boat, you can see how much they really trust you when you start bringing them some weird ideas.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your problem solving, creativity, ability to make things work in a weird market. We'll be posting a recording, and I'll send all the personal questions to Lyle, Dane, and Salem after this webinar so that they get that. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. You're welcome to email us directly too.
Yeah, we'll post their contact information and a recording and a write-up of this session so that it's available. Also share it to Race Directors Hub so that the conversation and questions can continue there. Thanks. Bye.